He said, these injuries that I'm looking at are so severe that at best you should be in a very dark place in your life. And he said, at worst, and I'm not trying to scare you, you should be one of those 22 veterans a day who's committed suicide. That's how bad your injuries are. He said, walk me through this leadership process in this cold exposure. The awareness of one thing leads to the success of everything else, and that's emotions. Once you have the comfort to say, I'm afraid, I'm insecure, I'm unsure, I'm mad, I'm jealous. Once you're able to look at that and go, here's what I'm feeling, that opens up your world. And that's the key for these people, in my view, who struggle with the responsibility of leadership.
All right, welcome back to the Better Human podcast. Today we have got a legend, Errol Doebler. Welcome to the show, my man.
Thank you, Greg.
Having this conversation, we were geeking out before the recording, just chatting about leadership. You're a leadership coach, but beyond that, for the audience, Errol is a leadership coach and author, former Navy SEAL, former FBI agent, and a level 2 instructor of the Wim Hoff method. And we're going to be chatting about things like stress and leadership and people and, philosophies, and maybe a little bit of a playbook today in regard to what we could do to be great leaders. So, Errol, welcome to the show, brother.
It's a pleasure to be here, Greg. Let's start making some better humans.
There you go. Love the branding. So, we were just kind of like rapping a little bit before, and I coincidentally have been chatting a lot about this. In fact, I'll share this with you. I came up with this stress model, and I want to run it by you, and maybe you could share some thought to it. So first thought around it is we live in a world of heightened stress. And I try to explain to people that, stress is actually good for us. The challenge is prolonged stress and the inability to manage it and deal with it. And I came up with an acronym the other day, and I thought this was kind of cheeky and cheesy and corny, but also gives us some basics when it comes down to stress. So it stands for this. So the first S stands for slow down, because I think when we're stressed, we're moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and if we're not thinking, it's a problem, right? So a little bit of like engaging and managing that stress is to begin that process of slowing down, stopping. There's another concept I teach, which brings us into the T, which is if we slow down enough, we're going to give ourselves some time, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna give ourselves some space, and you know this, and you'll appreciate this. Like all good decisions, have a little bit of time and thought and pondering and percolating with that. R stands for recognize. Let's recognize the thing that's creating stress. Is it a relational stress? Is it my job stress, financial stress, health stress, right? What do we know about stress, right? Ways to deal with it. Now it gets into the E, right? Which is exercise. Move your damn body, right? We're too busy sitting around. The next S stands for sleep. Super important aspect of stress. And the final one says that if we've done those first 4 stages well, we're prepared, or we're maybe in a better position to solve or solution the problem that was causing stress. So that's where I wanted to begin with you, my man. Let's talk about stress. Leadership is one of the most intense things, and coming from your background, SEALs, FBI, you got to have some thought and tools and bombs on how do we deal with stress. So first question I have for you is, what do we do with stress? Explain stress to us. How do we start to wrap our head around this?
Well, it's your R. It's recognize. If we're not aware of where we are, how we're feeling, what we're doing at all times, it will get past us. And that's an absolute fact. Now, again, we also talked about how corporate just butchers and mangles really good, useful terms. And I think being in the moment is one that has, seen its time come and go. But, I no longer, I used to say, oh gosh, that's no longer the word everybody wants to hear. And now I'm like, forget about it. It's still true. It may have become a cliche, but it became a cliche for a reason. And that presence, that awareness of what's happening, in my view, the recognition, being able to recognize, whoa, something's happening. That's stress. Okay. Now we can go forward. Now we can start using some other tools. But in my view, that's the key to everything, the awareness. And you can't be aware if you're not aware. It's got to be something that you're consciously thinking about all the time. It just does. So from my view, the recognition is the most important part. Now, how do you learn that? We talked a little bit about me being a Wim Hoff instructor. And for Ice Cold Leader, which is my company, we use process and we use wellness for great leadership. Part of the wellness portion is this cold exposure. So when we talk about how do we learn to recognize stress? Well, cold exposure, ice bath. When you get into an ice bath, it is an induced panic attack. That's it. So your ability, if your intention going in to say, okay, for now, I'm going to recognize what all this feels like. There will be a physiological response. I've done thousands of ice baths, Greg, and I still have to do, right? Even if it's a quick one, even on my best day, I still got to do something, right? Because that level of adrenaline is kicking through you, and that is stress. You start practicing that, you start recognizing that. Now you've got a tool going forward in your day-to-day. You recognize how I feel. Wait a second, that feels a little bit like that ice bath. That means I'm stressed. Now what? So that's the most important part in my view.
Yeah. As you were talking, I heard the theme of responsibility and accountability there, which is like, part of stress isn't there's a heavy emphasis on being responsible and managing and accountable for your actions, right? In fact, I battled with that when I was thinking about the acronym. I'm like, do we call R recognize, or do we make it responsibility, or a little bit of both? How important is it? Or here's a better question. We know it's important. What do you think is contributing to people pulling away from that? I think, in my leadership coaching conversations, I noticed that as a theme, which there's this hesitancy to accept the responsibility. Where do you think this is coming from? Or a better question, have you seen this in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I do. I see it a lot, and it's tough, right? Because as you well know, you get a variety of different people that come to you. If you've got the highest level people, right, the CEOs or whatever they are, they're coming to you, they're looking to get better. But we do a good job with them. And then they say, okay, now I need you to give this to my people. Now those people are kind of being mandated to go in. And they are not always the people who are ready to hear this message. Okay, so it takes a little longer. And sometimes it can be difficult. Rare instances, but I feel like I make my bones with my honesty. My program is very active. It's very engaging. And when people aren't doing the work, at some point, I'm going to have to gently, figuratively give you a shot in the nose. Okay. And people get surprised because at some point you say, well, I don't understand how after 4 weeks of an 8-week program, you haven't figured out that the problems that are being created are not everybody else's doing. You're the leader. It's your fault. End of story, period, end of story. You have put something in that culture. You have put something in this environment that has allowed people to act this way, and now you're blaming them. And now that's just an example, right, of the things I've seen. And, again, you want people to come to these conclusions on their own. That's the magic, and that's the beauty of what we do. We don't tell people what to do. We ask questions, we guide, right? We give ideas, we give thoughts. Here's what I think. And we want people to say, boom, I got it. But sometimes they need a little bit of that. So, I do see it. I think there's an element of insecurity. I think there's just an element of not fully understanding what leadership is. There's not a full understanding that leadership is an absolute one of the most difficult things you'll ever do in your life. It's just really hard. And that's why leadership is at a premium. Errol, how do you make me understand? Well, when we talk about stress and recognition, and we talked about this before we got on, the awareness of one thing leads to the success of everything else, and that's emotions. Once you have the comfort to say, I'm afraid, I'm insecure, I'm unsure, I'm mad, I'm jealous. Once you're able to say, look at that and go, here's what I'm feeling. I'm jealous of that person. That opens up your world. Okay. Right. And that's the key for these people, in my view, who struggle with the responsibility of leadership.
Right. You'll like this one. One of the things I teach is how do you phrase or express emotions? And the majority of people express emotions through the blame. Errol, you make me feel. Errol, you're pissing me off. Errol, you're getting under my skin. And I say, you know, the way we got to start that is changing the language, which is, Errol, I am feeling frustrated.
Mhm.
I am stressed out right now. I am like getting really hooked by the current relationship, but there's a level of ownership of emotions, because, you know, people can't take that away from you. You know, when I come and I blame you with my emotions and I'm like, hey, you make me feel, there's a good chance you're going to say, oh, I don't do it that. Like, we're being
Right.
sensitive, and now we end up, and I think, you know, in our effort to be seen and acknowledged for our emotions, the way we communicate it goes all wrong. You know, I was listening to you talk about like your program, and it reminded me of, I recently had a program, and over several weeks, and it wasn't leadership, it was more around communication and just personal development, right? And I'm sort of halfway through, and we get to a stage of practicality, right, where you're like, all right, let's get into your stuff, right? Like, what are your scenarios? This entire class, every week thereafter, you're like, all right, let's get into. I don't really have anything.
I don't have anything.
I don't have anything, and I'm looking at you going like, man,
Yeah.
how the fuck do you not have anything?
Yeah. I don't have anything.
Like, you drive a car, like you, like there's interactions. So do you find the same, that sometimes it's like pulling teeth with people in these scenarios?
I do. So, you know, let me just give a little bit of color, if that's okay, right? My process is essentially just, I call it problem solving process. Yeah, I developed it, but all it is are the stages that the mind goes through for any challenge, any problem at all. Big, small, there is a trigger, there is an emotion. There is a learned behavior on that emotion. However ill-conceived it may be, a plan is formed, and then there's an action, and then there's a review, right? That happens every time. Now, that might be extended more, there might be more consequence to it, but that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Inside of that program, what I do is I just try to make people aware of each one of the elements, right? We break each one down week by week, and because they build on each other,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And then kind of that learned behavior based on the emotion, what's not in the natural brain cycle, and what we try to implement is, what is the behavior I want? Okay, there was this trigger, there was this emotion. This emotion intuitively drives me to this action, right? I am jealous, and then I lash out. Now that I recognize this, I get to say, how do I want to behave? Because lashing out isn't it, right? And it's up to you. I want to behave calm. I want to be engaging. You might say, I want to consciously act on my anger. Cool. As long as it's a conscious decision, then you could go back and evaluate, did that work for me or not? So, to your point, though, so that's kind of what we go through. So when we get to this element called guidelines for behavior, right? After it's what's the emotion, what's the intuitive action, let's start making some decisions. Okay. And they'll be your decisions now, because I put you through this hell of self-awareness. And then we get to, well, yeah, I'm just not sure. I think I'm pretty good. I do this. And that's when you got to kind of let it go. Okay, well, maybe there is nothing. But we're not going to let this go because there is something. And I will always have to ask, do we feel like there's really no place to get better? Because if there is, that's cool. Just let me know. No, there's got to be somewhere. Okay, we're on the right track. There's got to be somewhere. I always get to that place with people. Now, that's week 3. I may not get there till week 7 of 8 with some people, but we're going to get there, because I'm just not going to let it go. And sometimes it's subtle. And what people think when they go through some type of development thing like this, that there's going to be this life transformation. And generally speaking, I deal with very successful people like you do. The adjustment might be very small. Don't look for it. We're not going to turn you on your head. It might be just a little small adjustment. That's it. Live with that. It's okay. So yes, I do get it. I do find it fun, but we don't let it go, because we're gonna make you acknowledge something, but it's going to be something that you've observed. Yeah. Okay. And at the very worst, one time I've had to say, maybe the problem is you don't think you have any problems. I had to say that one time. But you know what? That person was like, oh, crap. You might be right. And then the floodgates opened. So, you know.
Awesome. You know, as you were talking, I just interviewed this guy, Andrew Daniel. First time I met him. Awesome. awesome dude, and to the audience and to you, Errol, as well. Like definitely someone to check out. But his whole premise and what he works on is, and just to make it short, self-development and personal development courses and self-help is not enough. Kind of what we're talking about, which is his whole thought is people will go through the exercise of the course, and they'll listen to the podcast and they'll read the book, but they don't action anything. They do nothing. Right? And, I've been saying this for years. The biggest failure with what my business or industry or our business and industry is as leadership coaches and leadership trainers and facilitators, people come out of the room thinking they're smarter. So they go through your program, they learn the concept, they go, you know what? Freaking amazing. All right. I've just done this 8-week program. I am no, cheesy marketing intentions, but I'm a better leader. Right. And you're not, because it's about actioning the stuff. So, talk to me about that, which is what could we do to ensure people action this stuff? Like how do we help people take those steps to implement, to action, to do?
Yeah. You're 100% right. So again, I deliver my message in many different ways. The primary way is this 8-week course, which involves, an hour call every week with a video series and work to do during the week. And that's what we'll focus on. But initially when I speak to people and I say it's an 8-week program, oh, well, can we cut it down to 4? I'm like, no, it's an 8-week program. And they say, well, that's an awful long time. And I said, trust me when I tell you, when you get done with the 8 weeks, you're going to feel like I don't know anything. And that's the beauty of it, right? Because there's going to be a lot of stuff that comes up. And now that means, okay, what do we do next? Because I got to keep this thing going. What we try to do at Ice Cold Leader is during this program, we have here's the element for the week, right? I told you the first one is emotional awareness. All I ask people to do for that first week, right, during the day, 4 times a day minimum, we've got a little text app, log in, an emotion you're feeling. That's it. You could put color behind it. You could do whatever you want, but I have to see mad, angry, jealous, whatever it is, I've got to see that. And right, so that comes back into my portal. So I get to see they're doing the work. And at the end of the week, I know we're going to have a conversation because they did the work. Okay, that's it. Now, sometimes I tell people, I can see your input. It's coming to me. If you don't do any work, I'm going to send you a gentle reminder. And if at the end of the week, there's nothing in there, we're not having our call because we're not going to pontificate. We have to have done the work. And now we can speak from a space of experience. Just this morning, I had a group of 4. They all go through, the thing on their own, but then we have a group call at the end. Nobody did the work. And I thought to myself, how am I going to deal with this? And you're just honest. You say, look, folks, I don't know what to say. And went through the whole thing and they're all like, nope, you're right. We can't waste our time. We don't know. It was weird the way they all collectively just didn't do any work this week. So from my standpoint, we don't go forward unless we do the work. All right, great. So Errol, I'm not going to hire you. I kind of like what you're saying. What do we do now? It's still a logging process of the work you're doing. If you're going to try to figure it out on your own, figure out what it is you want to do, and you better start logging the work you're doing so you can reflect back on it and see how it feels. But doing the work is the only way. And then documenting the work and seeing what that feels like to write it down or text it in like, oh God. So yeah, but at the end of the day, that simply comes down to somebody's desire to get vulnerable, to get committed, to get disciplined, and all those other adjectives that we throw out there, but that are necessary to throw out there.
And my father used to say this. He said, people don't change unless there's enough pain or there's enough negative or positive. So there's not enough pain or like the carrot, right? And as I've progressed in this career, I kind of agree with that statement more and more. I want to come to your book, right? The book is called The Process, Art and Science of Leadership. So you were beginning to talk to us through the process where you said, there's a trigger event, there's an emotional response, there's a pattern sort of set of behaviors. So break this down for us. So explain the process and then walk us through that guideline that you had for behavior.
Yeah. So and again, this is a little marketing thing. The book, we're going to relaunch the book as a second edition, and it's going to be Ice Cold Leader, leading from the inside out. And the reason we're doing a second edition is because the book I wrote was the process, art, and science of leadership, right? I have a process. There is an art inside of that process, and there is a science, a neurological science that backs up what we're doing. I tell some good stories in the book. I give some personal examples. But at the time, I didn't know why I was able to create this process. I'd since learned, after I'd written the book several years later, that I had suffered from traumatic brain injury. I had two massive head injuries when I was in the SEAL teams, that back in the late 1990s, nobody was talking about head injuries. So I was dismissed on my way. There was a couple other injuries. And it wasn't until only a couple of years ago, I met a guy who specialized in traumatic brain injury and a non-pharmaceutical treatment. I met him at a cocktail party of all things. Like, what is this, 1970? You were at a cocktail party? Well, yeah, I was. And and we had just started talking, and he was talking about his stuff. And to get into the conversation, I shared with him my injuries. And he said, well, what happened? I said, well, I just told you what happened. I got that, I fell and the whole thing. And he said, no, what happened after? And the way the Navy treated me leaving the Navy, I vowed I was never going to talk about my injuries, because they made me feel like I was faking it to a degree. Like, okay, yeah, your head, Errol, I'm not really sure, but these other things you got to go. And I said to myself, like, if I can't talk to this guy who's trying to help people, who am I? So I said, well, and I walked him through. I said, I haven't had a good night's sleep in 20 years. I get very agitated sometimes. I have trouble controlling my emotions in response, and so on and so forth. So he brings me in for this thing called the Wabi scan. It measures the energy in your head. Errol, here it is. This part of your brain is dormant. This is the part of your brain that controls how you react to emotions, and it's not working. Ipso facto, there are your problems. And he goes, but here's my question to you. He said, these injuries that I'm looking at are so severe that at best you should be in a very dark place in your life. And he said, at worst, and I'm not trying to scare you, you should be one of those 22 veterans a day who's committed suicide. That's how bad your injuries are. He said, walk me through this leadership process in this cold exposure. Okay, so the second edition of the book gives more color around how this thing was created, and it really saved my life. Okay, so I hope that's okay that I threw that in there.
By the way, that's amazing, and it gives so much context to the power of your process, right?
Yeah.
And where I'm like leaning into this right now, like, this wasn't something that you did 20 years ago. It took you the 20 years of going through, and then, the universe, as they say, lining you up in a way to eventually be exposed to figure out what it was, why it happened, or not what it was, why it's impacting you, and then what is the tool. And the fact that I turned around and said, by the way, you should either be dead, suicide, or not getting off the couch. What are you doing right now?
What are you doing? Tell me about, because he was familiar with, that I had this company and that I did the. So anyway, the point is, I explained to him the process, right? And the process, again, was all around awareness. I said, Doc, I struggled with my emotions, and I didn't like my intuitive actions, right? So I was so hyper aware of how I felt and what I was doing, or how I would naturally react all the time, and then how I wanted to act. And he was like, situation by situation. I said, in a big umbrella, yes, but also situation by situation. And I said, then I would make a plan how I would get through this situation behaving this way. And that planning process is the Navy SEAL planning process: situation, mission, actions, contingencies, command, communication. And I would do that. And then I would always reflect. Okay, how'd that work? How'd that feel? And he said, well, how long have you been doing that? I said, since the day I got injured. And I said, then I was able to reflect back on things. Okay, yeah, this is what I was doing. This is how I was feeling when this bad thing happened and when this good thing happened. He goes, so you've been doing this for 20 years? I said, yeah. He goes, well, like, how often do you actually think about it? I said, every time I walk into a room. He goes, every time you walk into a room, I said, every time I walk into a room, every time I meet somebody, every time I'm in a different situation, this is the process I go through. And he says, it sounds exhausting. I said, it is exhausting. And I said, maybe that's why I can't sleep, but the alternative, it doesn't work. So he says, okay, that makes sense. He goes, now tell me about this cold exposure. I walked him through the physiological benefits, right? The stress that would build up in me. And now we know scientifically that the cold exposure reduces the inflammation in the body, resets the nervous system, because you go from sympathetic to parasympathetic. When you learn to calm yourself down, that was able to flush all of that negativity out of my system. And then I could focus on my process, right? And he goes, well, that's it. You've saved your own life. Now, that's great, right? That's an overwhelming thing to hear. And that's for our purposes, right? That's a validation of the process and wellness aspects of what I do. More interestingly, so I went through one of his treatments. It's stem cells and insulin, just nasal drip into the brain. That's it, creating more energy in the brain. And about 2 months, right, after a treatment, I go back in for another scan. Okay, and again, this Wabi scan measures the energy in your brain. And he goes, I've never seen anything like this. He says, you see in this area, first of all, he says, you see the blue? I'm like, I don't see so much of the blue anymore. He's right, the blue's gone. Your brain is healed. See here in the first scan, it was like 2 megahertz of energy. Now it's 32 megahertz of energy. And he's going through all parts of the brain. And he goes, this is unbelievable. And I said, well, what do you attribute this to? Like, why did I get such great results? And he said, I believe that you got such great results for the same things that saved your life. You had so primed your mind, body, and spirit to this awareness of emotions and all these things you described. And you had so primed your physiology to this cold exposure and regulating your and moving your nervous system in and out and exercising it, that when you got one catalyst, your brain exploded with energy and you healed. So that's kind of the process. And the fact of the matter is that I don't have to now go through this process every time I enter a room, because my brain is healed. And now all that work I did to make a habit, all of a sudden it just kind of happened, and it's a life-changing thing. So yeah, that's the kind of the process in wellness. But the more interesting part is that's the validation of it.
Right. That's amazing. You are the proof of neuroplasticity. Right? Yep. The brain can rewire, reheal, right? Or heal, I should say.
Yep.
You are the example of don't try to do the work in the moment, do the work consistently. So when you end up in the moment, there's a little bit of muscle memory and
boom,
click into it. You once again are talking a lot about the baby steps and the actions, which is, yes, we're trying to achieve these things, but let's just start doing the steps. Let's start doing the action. And that's a great lesson for leaders, which is like, if you're leading and coaching and driving performance and individuals in an organization, let's break it down to the process a little bit here, right? Which is 1, begin self-awareness. 2, let's get accountability and responsibility going. 3, let's put some tools in place to you. Do the work, right? Keep doing the work, keep doing the work, keep doing the work, and do some work some more, and so on and so on and so on. And eventually we'll get to the stage where we're a little more natural. And that's a great example of how to improve performance. Awesome, Errol. Love that, man.
Well, and if I can just piggyback on that, right? It goes down to your acronym around stress, right? When we talk about slow down in time, okay, as you put it, there are some times in moments of stress you will not have time to slow down and take some time. And that's what I ask leaders. It's what I kind of put out to the people who I work with. In times of chaos and stress and uncertainty, you will go to what you know automatically. The question is, what do you know, right? And if you don't know what you know, then your results are going to be random, right? So what I say is for Ice Cold Leader, know this process. You're not sure what's going on? Go to this process. It will set you free. It will give you time because you are thinking about something, right? It'll give you recognition, right? All the things that you said, but you've got to know something. And because if you don't know where to go when things get bad and stressful, then it's going to be a random result. And that's not what leaders live on, random results.
I love what you just said there, and I'll paraphrase it, which is leaders need to operate with intention, purpose, and direction, right? Like you can't just be doing this randomly and winging it. In fact, have you heard of the term winging it? Like, you know where the word actually comes from, the definition behind winging it?
I don't. I don't. I've obviously heard of winging it, but I don't know where it comes from.
By the way, you could use this one as well, right? And you could use my stress acronym as well, right? So winging it, because I used to love saying, "Oh, I'll just wing it, wing it, wing it." So winging it comes from back in the day of the theaters, where there was an understudy for the main actor or actress, right? So something would happen to the actor, the understudy or the backup actor or actress would swoop in and pick up from where they left off. Now you got to imagine, like, this is back in the day. So when we think about theater, we think about the main actor being too drunk and falling off the stage, or not showing up or being killed or something, right? So the understudies would wait in the wings of the theater. So if anything happened, they would be able to swoop in. So the concept of winging it has nothing to do with it has nothing to do with being spontaneous and just figuring out.
It's the opposite.
It's
the opposite.
It's doing all the work. So when you show up in the moment, it's you're ready to action. Super cool. Talk to me a little bit about you're a Wim Hof certified facilitator, coach.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us, the audience, myself, a little bit about the benefits of, and we've started the conversation. Actually, we've gone into the benefits, but where would someone begin? And my wife wants to get a cold plunge, by the way, so maybe I'm selfishly asking this. So
yeah, good stuff. So right now the Wim Hof method is the primary element of our wellness, leadership wellness, right? That's what it's leadership wellness. I have also recently, I am one block away from my yoga certification, because that is also another area where things happen. But I want to focus on the cold. So where do we start? Okay. So, look, if anybody follows me, Ice Cold Leader, you see a bunch of cold stuff. You see me in the tub of ice. You see me in the Colorado River, with it frozen, all this stuff. So is this where that's it? I got to do that? No, you don't have to do that. When I work with people in person, I do it that way for a couple of different reasons, because we also apply the emotional and psychological elements of the cold to help you recognize, I'm nervous, or I have this emotion, or that, because there's nothing quite like sitting in front of an ice bath to get you going and then recognize, okay, what are my feelings? What are my emotions? How do I want to act? The whole thing. So you can really practice the whole process. That said, the science, and Wim Hof doesn't do anything anymore without a team of scientists, and his studies just keep coming out. The guy is truly a pioneer around this. The studies are showing, and give me an inch on either side of this fact, but it's accurate. 3 times a week, 30-second shower, and it can be as warm as 58 degrees, will begin to give the physiological effects of learning how to exercise your nervous system, right? There's a voluntary aspect to what is happening inside of that. So cold exposure to improve your physiology. What do we mean by improve your physiology? Well, we're talking a lot about your innate immune system, right? When you exercise it, again, by cranking up that sympathetic fight or flight through cold, and then learning how to relax in there, right? And then bringing it back down, you're exercising your system, your immune system becomes stronger. So to get started, you can just start that way. Okay. It does not have to be this super intense thing. All right. When all this
in like a shower, like 3 times a week, 30 seconds a shower, 58 degrees, because you could go colder than that, right? Like how cold?
100%. And, that's where, that's where the mental and emotional aspect comes in to the cold, right? What we talked about in the beginning of this thing, recognizing stress. Yeah, I guess technically, if you got into an ice bath and did this, your physiology's still working. We can do better, right? We can do better. Let's recognize the elements of stress. Let's recognize the power of our breath to calm us down. Let's recognize the importance of being in a meditative state and understanding what that is. One focus to get me through this difficult time. In this case, it's my breath. That is a lesson you take everywhere. Okay, so again, we use, at Ice Cold Leader, we use it as an encompassing thing. Not everybody cares about that other stuff. Okay, the physiology. I'll give you an example. Let's talk about COVID. Okay. Ooh, God, where's he going to go with this?
I'll talk about this shit all day.
Yeah. Okay, let me just say, okay, everybody, COVID was real. It existed. People died. But it was a virus. If you remember, before it became so politicized, it was the novel coronavirus, the new virus. I don't care if it was man-made or not. That's a whole different issue. The fact of the matter is it was there. Okay? People got it. People died. Yes. Why did people die? People died at the end of the day because their immune systems were weak. And they weren't prepared to deal with a new virus. So their immune systems overreacted and then they died. That's a fact. Okay. Why was their immune system weak? Because on average, they had 3 comorbidities. I think it is somewhere from 2.5 to 3. They had diabetes. They had cardiovascular disease. They had something else that weakened that immune system. Okay. So, oh, Errol, you didn't take a side on COVID. You didn't call anybody out. No, that's what happened. Okay. And that's why people died. So how do we get past that? Well, when we exercise our physiology, what does that mean? That means voluntarily going to a fight or flight state and then voluntarily coming to a rest to digest. It exercises all that stuff inside of us. So when the immune system needs to work, it works, and it works without showing you the effects of the disease to a degree. Makes sense, right? So again, your wife, where does she want to start? Cold showers are fine. It does not have to be this awful. Now, eventually, though, you're going to want to challenge yourself, and that's a good thing. And those cold plunges are great. Right? I think the brand Cold Plunge, they're fantastic. The water circulates, it keeps it clean, stays, steady all the time. If you do, like I used to do a meat freezer, right? A 15 cubic foot meat freezer, you fill it full of water, you turn it, then you got to dump it and clean it every now and then because it gets funky. That Cold Plunge is solid. I think they're like $5,000, so they're pretty expensive.
Cold Plunge, it's like the AAA sort of version of it, right? And it's definitely an install, and you got to think about it from a house standpoint. It's not just like one of these portable units that you stick anywhere.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this: so how often do you cold plunge, and for how long do you cold plunge for?
Yeah, good question. So let's go to the science first. The science says the effects of the cold will last up to 5 days, right? So you get into that cold shower, whatever it is, your physiology is going to be working. Okay, now I don't know the nuances around what happens if you get into a steam bath right after. I'm not sure, but it's going to last. Okay, so when we talk about the Wim Hof method and the breathing, if you want the effects of the breathing technique, you've got to do them every day. The cold, you don't have to do every day. Now, that said, I am generally doing something cold about every day, right? I'm in Colorado. I'm just outside of Aspen here. There's still a foot of snow on the ground. It's fantastic. I might walk outside at night with my shirt off, just be cold, right?
So as well, like you don't have to get in the actual water, like just all
cold is cold. Cold is cold. Now, the water is 60% more conductive than the air, so it'll be a little tougher. But again, we're talking about cold is cold. So what else? I don't always have, not time. Sometimes I'm just not up to getting into the 30-degree ice bath outside. Sometimes I'm not. But I will turn my shower cold before I get out. That's become such a habit with me. So I'm generally doing something cold every day. Now, when I'm super stressed, right, you can feel it, right to the ice bath. That's it. Got it, right? I don't have time for anything. No, that's when you need to make time, right? Because you do have 3 minutes. You may not feel like you have 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes. Now, how long do I stand? There is no, aside from that 30-second, thing I told you 3 days a week, there's no science, at least that I'm aware of, that says staying in the ice bath for 10 minutes, which I don't know many people who can do that, is better than staying in for 30 seconds. I haven't seen anything, and I don't think there is anything. What I tell people is let getting your breath be your guide. Let your goal getting in to be, how do I go from to, once you get there, get out. But once you get there, you're going to want to start going to the next level. Well, how long can I stay in? Can I start moving blood around? Can I make the pain in my fingers go away? So there's all sorts of things, but that's where I am. When I'm short on time, but I know I need it, it's maybe another 30 seconds just so I make sure I'm keeping my breath and my focus, and then I'm out. So I usually stay in, on an average time, it's a couple minutes, right? A couple minutes.
I think I read something or saw something recently. Was it 11 seconds in a plunge will give you so much results? And
I'm sure
no need to stay in there for like 10 minutes as you're describing. It's build up and you build up and you build up and you build up. And it's about exercising the breath and stuff, which is good because, look back to what you do from a leadership training and coaching standpoint. Leaders can do this in their office. They could take time for their breath before they walk into that boardroom meeting or before they have to have that big sort of conversation or go deal with that client. So super cool.
Well, I'll give you an example of that breath, right? Because one of the things I say, you'll find your breath and lead, right? So now we're kind of transitioning to cold exposure, but the breath is so important in cold exposure. But again, well, Errol, I don't have an ice bath. Right? So I worked with a client, and he was a IT CEO of a startup. It was small but super successful, and he was asked to speak at a conference. And this is after I had, we're done working together, and he called me, and he said, "Find your breath and lead." I'm like, "Yep, find your breath and lead. What can I do for you?" He goes, No. That was it. He goes, "I was so nervous before I got out there," because he had done this on purpose. He put himself out there to go on the speaking circuit because he needed to overcome that. And he said, "Errol, all I could think about, right? I went through the process. I was good. But then I was like, just find your breath. Find your breath." He goes, and it worked. It worked. Right?
That might be your tagline, right?
Well, we use it, right? Our T-shirts and our sweatshirts have "Find your breath and lead." So we definitely use it.
Definitely got to put it on a T-shirt.
Yeah. Well, if it's not on a T-shirt, it doesn't exist. Correct. So, but again, the power of the breath. So to your point, leaders, I don't know how you don't go into a room or leave your office to present yourself or anything, be it mom or dad or whatever it is, and don't go, "Okay, let me give my best self here," whatever that's looking like,
I used to breathe on the way home after work because I didn't want to walk into the house intensely because you bring this energy with you. So I'd breathe in the car on the way home. So I super, super appreciate the insight and the thought. I know the audience does as well. And, just to emphasize or to reinforce some of the things that you spoke about, which is, when you take care of yourself, right, and you start to implement some of these processes that you do at Ice Cold Leader, which includes, breath work and cold and the process for monitoring and managing behavior and emotions, you're going to show up way more effectively. We come to the question at the end of the show, which is the most important question, which is the better human question, which I'm going to ask you about a better leader. So instead of saying, what do you think we could do to be better humans? I'm going to say, what do you think we could do to be better leaders? But before we go there, just for the audience, if the audience wants to learn more about you and Ice Cold Leader and when and your book, when the second edition is coming out, where could they find out more information on this?
Ice Cold Leader, icecoldleader.com, Ice Cold Leader on Instagram. Right now, I'm Errol Doebler on, my God, what's the business one?
LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. Jesus, what's wrong with me? We have an Ice Cold Leader page, but it just seemed like my personal one kind of blew up. But and Facebook, Ice Cold Leader. So everything Ice Cold Leader, you'll find me on all the social media and the website. We've got a good website. It shows our services. It gives background on all this stuff. So, and then the book, Process, Art, and Science of Leadership. Again, a second edition. The name is going to be Ice Cold Leader, Lead from the Inside Out. And that gives more of the background, a couple more good stories about how I got injured, good wartime, stories and stuff like that. So a little more entertainment value. But that's it. That's where you find me.
Cool. Super cool. So as mentioned at the end of the show, we come to the most important question, which is, what do you think we could all do to be better humans tomorrow? And I'm going to add in, and better leaders tomorrow.
Yeah. Well, and I've listened to your podcast and I've heard you say, right, it's not leadership, right? It's human performance. It's human being, right? And it is. I can't teach you to be a better leader if you're a crappy human being. So what do? What's the one place that we can go? And I just say you start from the beginning. If you start getting aware and getting honest and vulnerable, just even with yourself, around your emotions, okay? And what are the intuitive actions on those emotions? You will automatically begin making adjustments. You will automatically start seeing things about yourself that you weren't aware of, that you don't like, and you say, I'm going to change that. Because if you are not honest with yourself and aware of, I feel insecure, you can't make any changes. You can't make any changes without the awareness and the acknowledgement. Start with the emotion. The step 1A is then, what's my intuitive action on that emotion? And do I like it? So that's where I think we start.
Love that, man. Love that. Awareness, responsibility, actioning it, man. You just nailed that all in one answer. All right, Errol. Thank you so much. I was chatting with Eric right before I got on the phone. Podcast. But Errol, man, really, really appreciate it. Ice Cold Leader for the audience. Definitely go check him out. Go follow him. You and I connected on social. I love your stuff. And yes, I do see lots of videos and pictures of you jumping in the ice cold river in Colorado. Is this guy insane? All right. Why doesn't he just get a cold plunge jumping in a river? That's my issue with like lakes and rivers is I don't want my feet to touch the bottom. And if I can't see the bottom, I don't want to get in the water either. So that's a whole nother conversation.
I think that's a whole nother issue that you probably have to work through, but it's okay. I get it.
Errol, you're the man. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Greg.
To the audience, if you like today's episode, as usual, share it, like it, subscribe to it, go follow Errol Doebler, Ice Cold Leader. He's got some awesome content. Or check out his up and coming second edition of the book, which is very exciting. Stay happy, stay healthy, and we will see you at next episode.